We got a lot of questions. Welcome to the Google Tag Manager Q&A session. The first question is, there are other tag manager solutions. Why Google Tag Manager? Very good question. Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics have become, for me, the de facto standard. Even in big organizations, somehow Google and Microsoft always manage to get their feet in there, and it is allowed to use those tools in there. And for startups, it is an incredibly flexible solution. It's 99% free. You need a lot of events and for it to need Tag Manager 360. But if you have that problem, congratulations. As I said, I like the Matumo Tag Manager. I like Segment. I used Tag Commander in the past. Wasn't super happy about that one. If you have Tag Manager solutions that you would like to share, please leave them in the Discord or in the comments below wherever you're watching this. Yeah, so that is the main reason why I'm using that. So, what is easier or better, Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics? Thank you for that question. So it's not an either or question. If you want to use Google Analytics, you can install it straight on your website, or you can install it through Google Tag Manager. Yeah, so Google Tag Manager is a layer between your website and a tool like Google Analytics. So it's not a question of whether or not. I highly prefer Google Analytics through Google Tag Manager. Yeah, because you're much more flexible and you can do so much without coding. So it's definitely my preference. There are times and reasons when just implementing Google Analytics is the better solution because it's simpler. It's just a temporary landing page. You don't want to do much on it and kill it tomorrow. Then I wouldn't waste my time on Google Tag Manager. Yeah. All right. Okay, how complex can I get with the rule-based tag firing? I don't think there's a limit to the complexity. You can go down to the CSS and ID level to select elements. You can do and or, but there's a limitation here. You have to decide on and or. You cannot say like, oh yeah, I want this group of ands and or I want this group of other ands. You have to decide like, I want all of those filters followed or I want any of those filters followed. That is the limitation, which can be mitigated by trigger groups. You can, and that is another question that I saw coming up, you can combine different triggers into a trigger group and then again say and or. Is that tag supposed to fire it when all of those criteria are fulfilled or just some? And I think that gives you enough complexity. If you include the abilities that you have on the data layer, I don't think there's a reasonable limit to what you can do. Cool. So next question. How do events affect performance of a website? I think Google Tag Manager actually has an advantage what page speed is concerned over putting the pixels straight onto your website. Google Tag Manager is very mindful of asynchronous loading. That means it prioritizes, your website prioritizes the content first and then all of the tracking stuff. And you are in charge, or you are able to decide in which sequence tags are being fired. So you can, for example, fire the tracking tags before the chat widgets. So the chat widget is not hanging up your tracking time because it usually takes some time to load. So in general, of course, Pixel can slow down your website, but as long as the page content is prioritized and loaded first, I think you're making a good deal here. Yeah, and it's not only about total amount of kilobytes on your page or what a tool like Google Page Insights is going to tell you how long it takes to load the complete page. It is about when is it interactable and engaging for the user? When can you see the first ink being drawn on the page? And when can they start clicking? As long as this is prioritized and happens really fast, below 2 seconds, you're good to go, and you can add as many pixels as you like, in my opinion. Okay, next question. Can you do meaningful exports from Google Tag Manager to your Google Data Warehouse? Yes, you can. There are some restrictions or some reservations that are for the Analytics 360, for the Google Tag Manager 360. There are definitely integrations with BigQuery and with other data storage solutions. What I see more frequently, though, is that, for example, you export from Google Tag Manager into a data warehouse, from Google Analytics or a Facebook or a segment to a data warehouse. I see it rarely that data is pushed from a data warehouse, from Google Tag Manager directly to a data warehouse. I just see it very, very rarely, but it is definitely doable. And consider that you can do anything you want with JavaScript on this end. The question is that the right place? Do you have enough data context to make it worth being exported? I think I prefer first sending it to a proper analytics tool and then taking it from there to a data warehouse. But I guess there are situations where this is highly interesting. What I see actually more frequent is the other way around, that data is being pushed to Google Tag Manager from a place, not necessarily data warehouse, but a Google Form or other analytics tools or a CRM. Because then this information is now being used to personalize data for the user on the website. Much more interesting that way for me. All right, so we get 12 more questions. Awesome. It is 20:07. We're gonna keep answering questions, I think, until 1:15. So Detlef is asking, I know which one you are. Thank you for joining us again. Would you recommend to put a trigger on the end result or each individual step? How do you avoid to double count the same event? So, okay, let's say you have a funnel that consists of 10 steps. The first one is a person lands on the website, and the last one is person made a successful appointment with you. But in between there are steps. I would highly recommend tracking the individual steps, at least in a reasonable amount, let's say 10 steps, because the user behavior becomes much more clear. And you usually, as I said before, you don't up in the situation to start the campaign and suddenly, bam, everybody reaches the end of the funnel. Yeah, so you want to know where they are dropping off. And how do you avoid double counting the same event? I don't worry about it on the event level that much. If you import it as a goal in Google Analytics, it's just being counted once per session. So that is already a limitation. But you can usually look at the total number of events being fired versus unique events. And this is Google's or Facebook's, at least try to limit one event to one person and just to count it as one. A unique event is just one user firing it 13 times. Yeah? All right, thank you for that question. The next question. When is it better to install pixels via Google Tag Manager, and when is it better to just hard code them? If you want to go quick and dirty, it's the hard coding. And if you are in this for a long run, if you're doing this in a more complex setup, then Google Tag Manager is a godsend, and I would pretty much always prefer that. Then, due to GDPR, you have to have the ability to connect the Google Tag Manager with the consent form of what your visitor is deciding in the cookie banner. Do they want to be tracked? And if yes, all pixels or just a few, just a selection, or not at all. that can make it a bit harder. And what I have done for that, for example, on WordPress, I keep the base pixels in my cookie consent solution. Yeah, my consent solution of choice is Bohr Labs cookies. And I fire the base tags there, but the event tracking, I keep that in Google Tag Manager and only fires when consent is given. All right, next question. Can I track iframes with Google Tag Manager? If you have control of the content of the iframe, so if you own the page and are able to put analytics on there as well, yes, 100%, you can track it. If it's from an external source, like a tool, like a webinar tool, and you cannot put additional tracking code on the content in the iframe, you can sadly not track events that are happening in the iframe. Okay, is Google Tag Manager for free? Yes, for the most users it's free. There is a paid solution within the Google 360 suite. If you have questions about that, agencies can help you with that. It's a big commitment. It's usually like a 5-figure per year plus commitment. But ask them. But until you have hundreds of thousands of users, usually for free. Okay, the next question. Can I combine triggers? Yes, you can combine triggers to so-called trigger groups. You create a new trigger. If you scroll down to the bottom, then you can see the trigger groups. Maybe I can show you really quickly. This is my Google Tag Manager, and if you create a new trigger here, and you create a new one, and you can scroll down and you can see that you have trigger groups, and here you can combine triggers and say, yeah, only when they did this and that, some conditions or all. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So let's go back. Yes, you can. All right, is Matumo Tag Manager as powerful as Google Tag Manager? I think the question is not as powerful. The thing is, what do you do when your company doesn't allow Google Tag Manager? Then you go to Matumo Tag Manager because you can host it for yourself and people suddenly think it's a lot safer. And that's fine with me. Let them do what they want. It is as powerful. I've seen also functions, for example, like video view time that is not limited to YouTube, that is already completely integrated. Stuff that wasn't available on Google Tag Manager. So on principle, I would say it is as powerful as Google Tag Manager, especially if you're like on level 1 and 2, you just want to do basic form submits, click tracking, that kind of stuff. I do not know if it's as strong in terms of like the data layer functions and the integrations with other tool providers. Yeah, you have to check that out. All right, so how can I track single page applications with Google Tag Manager? So what's the problem of single page applications? You land on a landing page, you do a lot of stuff, you end up on different screens, but you are still on the same URL. The URL never changes. And so Google Analytics or other tools do not recognize that a user has made a change, yeah, and went to different pages, which makes it hard to visualize the funnel and to see where people are dropping off. So you cannot use the normal page view trigger. What you usually can use, if you're, let's say you have a single page application built on Angular or React, and you used a router, which is very common to manage your URLs, then this is still a browser history change. And instead of page view, you can use the history change. Let me show you. Feature, let's discard those changes. So we have a trigger here. Yep, we want to add a new one. And this trigger is not a page view in a single page application. That only works for the very first load of the page. You need that as well, I guess. But here, down here, the history change. And that is pretty well handled if you use a router in your single page applications. If you don't use a router, use one, but you can also create custom events that you can fire and then use them as a trigger. So if you have a single page application, you know what you're doing in code, and you can fire anything to Google Tag Manager that you like. Alrighty, so 5 more questions. We are almost out of time, but come on, let's keep answering a couple. So how many events do you recommend? How many events do you recommend? I use too many. I said already, I love too many events. I recommend few, like 10 conversion goals, but have 100 events. It's all good. Keep them. Next question. Can you use trigger groups on a CMS as like WordPress or shop systems as Spotify to use that for pop-up events like vouchers and newsletters? Yes, you can. That's a good question, Stefan. So what he wants to do is to only show a certain voucher or a newsletter pop-up when people fulfill multiple criteria. For example, they have been on the page for a certain amount of time. That is the first trigger, the time trigger here that I showed you. This one, the timer. Yeah, only when people were there for how many milliseconds. Yeah? So, and then you want to be picky and say, but only when they have seen that website, or what I also like is when they come from a certain source. Yeah, so when they come from a certain influencer. That is very interesting, I think. Let's say you want to send a specific voucher to a person to want to announce it when they come from an influencer from a swipe up Instagram story promotion. You can actually see exactly where they came from, and then you can put that voucher, then you can customize it to that specific influencer. I usually do this through UTM parameters. I on the swipe up, I put in UTM parameters. You can Google that if you're interested. And then I just put in the campaign parameter, like the name of the influencers. And that is one of the filter criteria for the pop-up that is going to be triggered. So I like that idea. I very much like your question. Thank you very much. So 3 more questions. Can you use Google Tag Manager on an external page to your domain in order form via jot forms that is being tracked in Google Analytics? Yes, you can. The only thing that you have to be able to do is to add custom JavaScript to the jot form. Lots of tools do not allow it. Let's say Eventbrite. I'll use a lot of Eventbrite, and Eventbrite does not allow me to put in Google Tag Manager because it's too powerful. I could do too much with it and mess with the system. But lots of tools are allowing you to put any JavaScript you like additionally into the header, for example, on the jot form, and then you're able to put in Google Tag Manager. And I would highly recommend doing that. All right. You think as non-techies we can use it? I think Google Tag Manager has been made for non-techies. It is not very easy to use, yeah, but it is much less complex than custom coding all of that stuff. So yes, you need some technical affinity, but you don't have to know how to code. That is the beautiful thing about Google Tag Manager. So a very resounding yes. All right. Last question. Did I understand it right? I've installed Google Analytics on my website like Shopify. Now I feed more detail events from Google Tag Manager. Yes, you have installed the base pixel on your website like Shopify. And now you have, for example, web pages with forms on there that you want people to submit, or you want to track stuff that is outside of the e-commerce area. The e-commerce tracking is handled so beautifully by Shopify that I wouldn't mess with it. The only thing that I don't like is how they handle GDPR stuff. But you want to handle like form submissions and other special stuff, just the events. And now you can feed it through Google Tag Manager. You understand it perfectly. And I hope I translated your questions properly. All right, those are all the questions. Thank you, everybody. That was a beautiful meetup. Thank you very much, and see you on the next one. Bye-bye.